They say if you see one Apache, the rest are already watching you. The old ranch hands hammered that into Josie Whitlock's head since she was a girl. It was a rule of the desert, as true as the sun rising in the east and setting in the west, a law of survival. Yet here she stood, the blistering Sierra Blanca sun beating down on her, sweat gluing her cotton dress to her spine, staring at a single Apache warrior sprawled in the dust. And he wasn't watching anything at all. The land was dying of thirst. 3 weeks without a drop of rain had cracked the earth open like a dry bone. The little stream where Josie got her water was now just a muddy suggestion of what it used to be. It was barely enough to keep her and her stubborn mule, Clementine, from turning to dust themselves. It was not enough to be sharing, especially with a stranger, especially with an enemy. Damn fool thing to do, Josie, she whispered to herself, the words swallowed by the vast, silent landscape. She set down her precious pail of water, the metal hot to the touch. The man didn't move. He lay face down, a dark stain spreading on the back of his buckskin shirt. An arrow shaft, broken and jagged, stuck out from his side just below the ribs. The wound was a mess of dried blood, dirt, and buzzing flies. His breathing was a faint, ragged whisper. Josie scanned the horizon. She saw nothing but shimmering heat waves and jagged peaks. But the emptiness was a lie. It was the greatest lie the West ever told. You were never, ever alone out here. Eyes were always watching. That old warning echoed in her head, a drumbeat of fear. If you see one, the rest are watching. She fought every instinct screaming at her to turn around, to grab her pail and her mule and disappear back to the lonely cabin she called home. This wasn't her fight. This wasn't her problem. Bringing this man into her life was like inviting a wildfire into a dry forest. It would consume everything. But then he groaned, a low, pathetic sound of pure agony that cut right through her fear. She uncorked her canteen, wet her bandana, and knelt beside him. Gently, she turned him over. His face was young, smeared with sweat and dirt, his lips cracked and bleeding. She pressed the damp cloth to his mouth. He was too weak to drink, but some of the moisture seeped in. His eyelids fluttered, just for a second, revealing dark eyes clouded with pain before they closed again. She looked at the arrow. It was deep. No way to get it out here. Pulling it would just make him bleed out in minutes. Leaving it in meant the wound would fester, and he'd die a slow, agonizing death from infection. "Lord, help me," she muttered, tearing a long strip from her petticoat. "I know I'm going to regret this." Her hands trembled as she bound the wound, not too tight, but enough to offer some support and keep the flies away. Josie was strong. Years of hauling water, chopping wood, and wrestling with the unforgiving land had made her as tough as whipcord. But this man was solid muscle, and he was dead weight. She hooked her arms under his, dug her heels into the dirt, and began to drag him. Every inch was a battle. The broken ground tore at her boots. Her muscles screamed in protest. The sun was relentless. She kept her eyes on her small cabin, a tiny speck in the distance, a refuge she was now certain she was about to turn into a target. Dusk was beginning to settle by the time she finally reached her homestead, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her arms feeling like they were on fire. She couldn't bring him inside. That felt like a line she couldn't cross. The cabin was her sanctuary, the last piece of her husband Daniel that she had left. Instead, she hauled him to the root cellar. She wrestled with the heavy trap door, the wood groaning in protest. The air that rose from the darkness below was cool and smelled of damp earth. It was a relief from the oppressive heat. With one last surge of strength, she lowered him down into the cellar, his body thudding softly on the dirt floor. She covered him with an old quilt, one her mother had made. The colors faded from years of use. She placed her canteen, now half empty, within his reach, hoping he might wake up and have the strength to drink. Then she closed the heavy door, slid the thick wooden bolt into place, and the man was gone, swallowed by the darkness. Inside her cabin, the silence was deafening. Josie didn't light a lamp. She leaned her Winchester rifle against the wall next to the window, its cold steel a small comfort. She sat in her rocking chair, the one Daniel had built for her, and watched the desert transform under the moonlight. The familiar landscape now seemed alien, menacing. Every shadow looked like a lurking figure. Every rustle of the wind sounded like a footstep. A coyote howled, a lonely, mournful sound that split the night in two. "You've done it now, Josie girl," she whispered into the darkness. "You've brought the devil right to your doorstep." Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. She dozed in fits and starts, her hand always on the rifle, her ears straining for any sound out of place. When the first pale fingers of dawn stretched across the horizon, her eyes snapped open. Her body was coiled tight, every nerve screaming with anticipation. And then she saw them. They didn't ride in. They simply appeared, as if the morning mist itself had solidified into the shapes of men and horses. They materialized out of the gray light, silent and spectral. A dozen Apache warriors. They formed a perfect, silent circle around her tiny cabin. Their faces were painted for war, the stark patterns making them look like something from a nightmare. The morning sun glinted off the barrels of their rifles and the tips of their lances. They just sat there on their horses, watching, waiting. Josie's mouth went instantly dry. Her heart felt like it was trying to hammer its way out of her chest. The Winchester felt small and useless in her sweaty hands. This was it. This was the consequence of her one foolish act of mercy. She had saved one man only to sign her own death warrant. The warrior in the lead dismounted. He was tall, with shoulders as broad as an oak door. His face was a mask of hard lines, carved by the wind and the sun. A single eagle feather was tied into his long black hair. He walked toward her cabin with a slow, deliberate confidence that was more terrifying than any war cry. He carried a modern Spencer rifle, its brass fittings gleaming like gold. This wasn't just a raid. This was an execution. Josie knew she had two choices. She could stay inside, cowering in the dark, and wait for them to burn her out, or she could face them. She took a deep, shaky breath, pushed her shoulders back, and opened the door. She stepped outside into the cool morning air, her Winchester held low, but ready. The air tasted of sagebrush and fear. She raised her voice, trying to keep it from shaking. "If you're here for him, hear me first." The leader stopped, his eyes as dark and deep as a well at midnight, fixed on her. "He was dying," she called out, her voice growing stronger. "I gave him water. I bound his wound. He's not dead yet." The Apache leader just stared at her. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. The other warriors hadn't moved a muscle. They were statues of death, waiting for a signal. Josie could feel their eyes on her, a physical weight. Then the leader's expression shifted. It wasn't a smile. It was something far rarer, a flicker of respect. "You speak truth," he said, his English heavily accented but clear. "My brother lives because of you." The knot of terror in Josie's chest loosened, just a fraction. His brother. Before she could process what that meant, a new sound shattered the fragile peace. The thunder of hoofbeats coming fast from the west. Josie spun around, squinting against the rising sun. A cloud of dust was racing toward them, and out of it emerged 6 riders, and she knew exactly who they were. At their head rode Bo Cassidy, the cattle baron who owned half the territory and thought he was entitled to the other half. He'd been trying to run Josie off her land since the day her husband was buried. Behind him was Wade Cololton, the town marshal, a man whose loyalty belonged to Cassidy's coin, not to the law. And with them were 4 of Cassidy's ranch hands, their rifles already drawn. "Apache!" Cassidy bellowed as his horse skidded to a halt, kicking up a shower of dirt. "I knew it. The whole territory's been buzzing about savages on the move." The Apache warriors tensed, their hands moving to their weapons. Their leader, the brother, remained perfectly still, watching the newcomers with narrowed, calculating eyes. "Cassidy!" Josie shouted, stepping forward. "Turn around and ride out. There's no trouble here unless you bring it." Cassidy's face was red, a mixture of sun, whiskey, and pure, ugly greed. He sneered at her. "Josie Whitlock, should have known you'd be mixed up in this, harboring enemies of decent folk." He turned to his men, his voice dripping with venom. "She's gone soft for savages, boys. Probably been helping them raid our cattle all along." "That's a damn lie, Bo," Josie yelled, her finger tightening on the trigger of her Winchester. These men haven't done anything wrong. They've come for their wounded. That's all. Marshal Cololton urged his horse forward, his hand resting casually on the ivory grip of his Colt revolver. He looked down at Josie, his eyes cold and empty. Step aside, Mrs. Whitlock. These Indians are wanted, responsible for killing the Miller family over at Willow Creek. The Apache leader's voice cut through the air like a razor. My people have not killed your settlers. We track those who did. But Cassidy wasn't listening. He was playing to his audience. The only good Indian is a dead one of his ranch hands shouted. It was Jesse Vaughn, the youngest of the bunch, barely 20 and full of cheap whiskey and bravado. Before anyone could move, before anyone could think, Jesse raised his rifle and fired. The shot cracked through the morning stillness. It went wide, kicking up dust near the hooves of the Apache leader's horse. But it was enough. The world exploded into chaos. In the blink of an eye, the Apache warriors scattered, melting away from the circle like smoke in the wind. They moved with a practiced, lethal grace that was terrifying to watch. Cassidy and his men started firing wildly, their shots punching holes in the thin walls of Josie's cabin, splintering the wood of her porch railing. Josie didn't hesitate. She dove behind the heavy wooden water trough, the one Daniel had carved for her. She rested the Winchester on the edge and returned fire, her movements grim and automatic. She wasn't aiming to kill, just to make them keep their heads down. The air filled with the roar of guns, the whine of bullets, and the screams of men. An Apache warrior grunted and fell from his horse, clutching a bloody leg. One of Cassidy's men tumbled from his saddle, a silent, arching fall. The Apache leader, now back on his horse, was a whirlwind of motion, firing his Spencer rifle with deadly, methodical accuracy. Marshal Cololton's hat flew from his head, a neat hole punched clean through the crown. He cursed and ducked low. "Fall back!" Cassidy screamed, his bravado vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. He wheeled his horse around, spurring it mercilessly back the way he'd come. The others followed, firing blindly over their shoulders, dragging their wounded man with them. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. Silence descended, broken only by the ringing in Josie's ears and the pained gasps of a wounded man. She slowly stood up, her knuckles white on her rifle. Her arm was stinging, and she looked down to see a warm trickle of blood running down her forearm where a stray bullet had grazed her. She scanned the scene. 3 of the Apache were wounded, but none fatally. The leader was already off his horse, kneeling beside one of them, speaking in low, guttural tones. Then he stood and walked toward her. His expression was impossible to read. "You fight well, woman," he said. Josie lowered her rifle, wincing as the pain in her arm flared. "I'm not brave," she said, her voice raspy. "Just stupid." The ghost of a smile touched his lips. Sometimes they are the same thing. A sudden noise from the cabin made them both turn, a scraping sound followed by a muffled groan. The root cellar. The trap door was pushed open from below, and the wounded Apache warrior, her patient, was struggling to climb out. His face was a mask of pain, but his eyes burned with a fierce, desperate light. "Brother," the leader said, his voice suddenly filled with concern. He rushed to his side. "Taza, be still. You are safe." He helped his brother Taza out of the cellar and eased him to the ground. Josie watched as they spoke to each other in their own language, their voices low and urgent. Taza kept glancing at her and then back at his brother, gesturing weakly toward the cellar. The leader's dark eyes found hers again, and this time there was a new question in them, a sharp, intense curiosity. "My brother says you found it," he said, his voice flat. Josie's blood ran cold. "Found what?" "She'd found a wounded man, that's all." "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her hand instinctively going to the rifle she'd leaned against the trough. He took a step closer. He wasn't threatening, but his presence was immense. He was carrying something, a small leather pouch. "It is very important to my people. Did you take it from him?" A pouch? Josie searched her memory. When she had turned him over, when she had cleaned the wound. Had something fallen away? She hadn't noticed. She had been too focused on the arrow, on the blood, on the sheer weight of what she was doing. "No," she said honestly. "I didn't see any pouch." Taza, lying on the ground, groaned and spoke again, his words weak but insistent. He pointed a trembling finger back toward the root cellar. The leader looked from his brother to Josie, then to the dark opening of the cellar. A silent understanding seemed to pass between them. It wasn't on her. It was down there. Without another word, he walked to the cellar, lit a match, and disappeared down the steps. Josie's heart pounded. What was going on? What could this man have been carrying that was so important they'd risk coming here in broad daylight? Cassidy and the marshal hadn't just been on a random hunt for raiders. Their questions, their accusations, they had been specific. They had wanted the man in her cellar, not just any Apache, him. She looked at Taza, whose eyes were now closed, his breathing shallow. This was bigger than a wounded man. This was bigger than a land dispute with Bo Cassidy. She had stumbled into the middle of something dangerous, something secret, and now she was a part of it, whether she wanted to be or not. The leader emerged from the cellar a minute later. He was holding a small, flat pouch made of worn deer hide, tied shut with a leather thong. He held it as if it were a sacred object. He walked back to her, his face grim. You have done my people a great service, first by saving my brother's life, and now by protecting this. He held up the pouch. Cassidy and his men were not hunting my brother. They were hunting this. What is it? Josie asked, unable to contain her curiosity. He looked at her for a long, hard moment, as if deciding whether she could be trusted. Finally, he seemed to make a decision. It is a map, he said. A map to something Cassidy wants more than anything. Something he is willing to kill for. Something he believes will make him the king of this entire territory. He paused, his eyes locking with hers. It is a map to the lost silver mines of the Sierra Blanca. Josie felt the air leave her lungs. The lost silver mines. They were a legend, a campfire story told by old prospectors, a myth of a mountain veined with pure silver, a treasure so vast it was beyond imagination. Most people thought it was just a fairy tale. But if it was real, if this pouch held the key, then Bo Cassidy wouldn't stop. He wouldn't just come back with the army. He would burn the whole world down to get his hands on it. And she was standing right in the middle of the fire. The leader, seeing the understanding and the fear in her eyes, nodded slowly. Now you see. You cannot stay here. Cassidy knows you helped us. He will not rest until you are silenced. He will tell the soldiers you are a traitor. They will hang you. He was right. Her life here was over. The cabin, her home, was no longer safe. It was a tomb waiting to be sealed. What happens now? She asked, the words barely a whisper. He looked out at the vast, unforgiving mountains, then back at her. My name is Cochise. My people call me Runs Like Wind. You saved my brother. You fought our enemies. You have no home, but you are not without friends. He offered her his hand. It was a gesture so unexpected, so contrary to everything she had ever been taught, that for a moment she just stared at it. Come with us, he said. Our path is hard, but it is a path of freedom. With your people, you will find only a rope and a shallow grave. She looked at her bullet-riddled cabin, a place of ghosts and painful memories. She looked at the blood staining the dirt of her yard. Her husband was gone. Her quiet life was shattered. Runs Like Wind was right. There was nothing for her here anymore but death. She took his hand. It was rough and calloused, but strong and steady. My name is Josie Whitlock, she said. He nodded. For now, we will find a new name for you, a warrior's name. He turned and issued a series of sharp commands to his men. They began to move with quiet efficiency, tending to their wounded, preparing the horses. Josie went back inside her cabin one last time. The place was a wreck, bullets having torn through the walls. She moved quickly, grabbing only what mattered. Daniel's old silver watch, her mother's worn Bible, and every last box of rifle cartridges she owned. As she stuffed them into a saddlebag, her hand brushed against a loose floorboard near the hearth. The one Daniel had always told her never to touch. He'd said it was warped, that it would get stuck if she ever tried to lift it. But now in the chaos, with her life upended, a sudden, inexplicable curiosity seized her. Cassidy and his men had torn the cabin apart with bullets. What was one more bit of damage? She jammed the tip of her knife into the seam and pried. The board groaned, but then popped loose. Underneath was a small, dark space, and nestled inside it was a heavy iron lockbox. Josie's breath caught in her throat. Daniel had never told her about this. What secrets had her husband been keeping from her? She lifted the box out. It was heavy, locked tight. There was no key in sight. Frantically, she looked around. There was no time for a delicate search. The soldiers could be on their way right now. Runs like wind appeared in the doorway. "We must go. Now." "Help me," she said, pointing to the box. He saw the urgency in her eyes. He drew a heavy hunting knife from his belt, jammed the tip into the lock mechanism, and with a powerful twist of his wrist, wrenched it open. The metal screamed in protest and the lid popped up. Josie stared down at the contents, her mind reeling. It wasn't filled with money or gold. It was filled with papers, official-looking documents, letters, and a journal bound in worn leather. Daniel's journal. Her hands shaking, she picked it up and opened it to the last entry. The date was 2 days before he died. His familiar handwriting, usually so neat, was a frantic scrawl. "Cassidy knows. I don't know how, but he knows I've been talking to RLW. He confronted me today. Not with words. He showed me what he did to the Millers. God, the children. He dressed his men as Apache. He said it was a message. To me. To stay out of it. He wants the map. He thinks I have it. But RLW, his brother, is taking it to the safe house. I have to warn him. Cassidy is planning to ambush him near the old creek bed. If he gets that map, he'll own this valley, and he'll slaughter every last Apache to do it. I'm riding out to intercept Taza now. May God forgive me for getting involved in this, and may he protect Josie." Josie dropped the journal as if it were on fire. RLW runs like wind. Taza, the man in her cellar, the old creek bed, the very place she'd found him. Her husband hadn't died in a riding accident. He'd been murdered. He hadn't been a simple rancher. He had been working with the Apache. He had been fighting Bo Cassidy from the shadows. And he had died trying to save the very man she had just pulled from the dirt. The world tilted on its axis. Everything she thought she knew about her husband, her life, this land, it was all a lie. A carefully constructed illusion that had just been shattered by a dead man's words. "Josie," Runs Like Wind said, his voice soft but firm, "the soldiers are coming. We have to leave this place behind." She looked up at him, her eyes burning with unshed tears in a new, terrible fire. She grabbed the journal and the papers, stuffing them into her saddlebag. "This place is already gone," she said, her voice a low, dangerous growl. "Cassidy didn't just take my husband, he took my home. Now, I'm going to help you take everything from him." They rode out as the sun began its brutal climb, leaving the lonely, violated cabin behind. Josie, on her mule Clementine, felt like a ghost leaving her own grave. Runs Like Wind led them deep into the jagged heart of the Sierra Blanca, following trails that were invisible to anyone not born of this land. They moved with a silent urgency, the knowledge of the coming soldiers a spur at their backs. By nightfall, they reached a hidden valley, a secret oasis of green tucked between towering walls of red rock. A spring bubbled up from the earth, and the air was cool and sweet. It was a place of peace, but peace was not to be theirs. A scout, sent back to watch their trail, rode into camp just as they were making a small, smokeless fire. He spoke in rapid Apache, his words painting a grim picture. Runs Like Wind turned to Josie, his face a stony mask in the firelight. "The soldiers from Fort Stanton have joined with Cassidy. They are not following our trail. They are riding directly for the northern pass. They know where we are going." Josie's blood ran cold. The northern pass was the only way out of this range of mountains. If Cassidy and the army got there first, they would be trapped. Boxed in. "How?" she whispered. "How could they possibly know?" Runs Like Wind stared into the fire, his jaw tight. "There is only one way. Someone in my war party sent word to them. We have a traitor among us." The small camp, which had felt like a sanctuary moments before, now felt like a cage full of snakes. Every warrior she looked at was now a potential enemy. Who was it? The man whose wounds she'd helped bind? The silent warrior who had offered her a piece of dried meat? The paranoia was a poison, spreading quickly through the camp. The warriors began looking at each other with suspicion, their hands straying close to their weapons. Their fragile unity was crumbling from within. Runs like Wind held up a hand, and his voice cut through the rising tension. We will deal with our own. But first, we must deal with Cassidy. He looked at Josie. My brother told me about your husband, Daniel. He said he was a good man, an honorable man. He was trying to get this journal to the Army commander at Fort Stanton to prove what Cassidy was doing. Josie clutched the saddlebag containing the journal. So the Army, they're not all with Cassidy. No, Runs Like Wind said. The commander is a man of honor, but he is one man. Cassidy has the local marshal in his pocket, and his money buys the loyalty of many soldiers. He has likely told them a story of a savage massacre and a traitorous white woman. They will shoot first and ask questions later. He paused. But your husband mentioned a safe place, a place to meet, the Whispering Cave. Do you know of it? Josie shook her head. The name meant nothing to her. Taza, who was leaning against a rock, his face pale with pain, spoke up. Daniel told me, if I could not make it to the fort, I was to go to the Whispering Cave. He said a friend would be waiting there, a friend who could get the journal to the commander. Who? Runs Like Wind demanded. Who is this friend? He would not say a name, Taza whispered, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. Only that I would know them when I saw them. He called this person the Ghost of the Plains. A ghost. It was another dead end. They were trapped, hunted, and now they were chasing a phantom. Josie felt a wave of despair wash over her. It was hopeless. They were outmanned, outgunned, and heading into a perfect trap. But then she looked at Daniel's journal in her hands. He hadn't given up. He had ridden out to face Cassidy alone, knowing he was probably going to his death, all to do the right thing. She couldn't honor his memory by cowering in a canyon waiting to die. There is no traitor, she said suddenly, the idea hitting her with the force of a physical blow. Runs Like Wind looked at her, confused. What do you mean? How else could they know? They're not waiting for us at the pass, she said, her mind racing, piecing together the scraps of information. They're driving us toward it. Cassidy doesn't know where we are. He's just guessing. But he knows these mountains. He knows there's only one real way out. He's herding us, like cattle to a slaughterhouse. She looked up at the towering rock walls surrounding them. And I'll bet he has men in these hills right now watching us, waiting to spring the trap. As if her words were a signal, a single rifle shot echoed through the canyon. It didn't come from the entrance. It came from the cliffs above. A warrior who had been standing guard on a high ledge cried out and pitched forward, tumbling down the rocks. Chaos erupted. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness from a dozen different points on the canyon rim. They were surrounded, pinned down. It was the perfect ambush. Josie and the Apache scrambled for cover, bullets ricocheting off the rocks around them, sending sparks flying into the night. They were completely exposed, caught in a deadly crossfire. This way! Runs Like Wind yelled, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward a deep crevice in the canyon wall. They pressed themselves into the narrow space as bullets chewed up the rock just inches from their heads. The firing was relentless. It wasn't the wild shooting of Cassidy's ranch hands. This was disciplined, precise. These were soldiers. They were caught. There was no escape. They could either stay pinned down and get picked off one by one, or they could try to fight their way out and be cut to pieces. Through a gap in the rocks, Josie could see the entrance to the valley, and standing there, silhouetted against the moonlight, was a figure on horseback. They weren't shooting. They were just watching the slaughter. It was Marshal Wade Cololton, and he was smiling. Josie realized the horrifying truth. The marshal hadn't just been following Cassidy's orders. He was part of the plan. He had likely been the one feeding Cassidy information about army patrols, helping him cover his tracks. The law in this territory wasn't just blind. It was actively helping the criminals. The firing stopped as suddenly as it had begun. A voice boomed through the canyon, amplified by the echoing rocks. It was the marshal. Whitlock, give it up. You're surrounded. Throw out the map and the Indian, and we might let the rest of you live. Runs Like Wind muttered a curse beside her. It was a lie. They would never be allowed to live. They were witnesses. Josie's mind was a whirlwind. Trapped, no way out. But Daniel's words from the journal echoed in her head. A friend would be waiting. The ghost of the plains. It was a desperate, insane long shot, but it was the only shot they had. The Whispering Cave, she said to Runs Like Wind. Where is it? He looked at her like she was crazy. It is on the other side of this valley. We would have to cross the open ground. We wouldn't make it 10 feet. Do you trust me? She asked, her voice low and intense. He stared at her, at the fierce determination that had replaced the fear in her eyes. He saw the spirit that had made her help his brother, the spirit that had made her stand up to Cassidy. He gave a single sharp nod. Then give me the pouch, she said, and cover me. Before he could argue, she snatched the leather pouch from his belt. She took a deep breath, clutching the pouch in one hand and her Winchester in the other. Then she did the last thing anyone expected. She stepped out from behind the rocks into the open moonlight. All right, Marshal, she yelled, her voice shaking but clear. You want the map? Here it is. She held up the pouch. For a moment there was dead silence. The men on the cliffs, the marshal at the canyon mouth, everyone was focused on her, a lone woman standing defiant in the middle of a kill zone. Just let the others go, she shouted. You have no quarrel with them. Your fight is with me and him. She nodded toward the rocks where Taza was hidden. Marshal Cololton laughed, a cold, ugly sound. That's not how this works, Josie. You don't get to make deals. It's not a deal, she said, her voice dropping, taking on a hard edge she didn't know she possessed. It's a warning. And with that, she turned and sprinted across the open ground, heading for the far side of the canyon. For a split second, everyone was too stunned to react. Then the world erupted in gunfire again. But this time, it wasn't just coming from the cliffs. Runs Like Wind and his warriors opened up with a furious volley of covering fire. They weren't aiming to hit anyone. They were just trying to buy her seconds. The ground around Josie's feet exploded in puffs of dust as bullets slammed into the dirt. She ran faster than she had ever run in her life, her lungs burning, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was a suicide run. She knew it, but it was their only chance. She could hear the bullets whining past her ears. She felt a searing pain in her side as one of them grazed her, but she didn't stop. She just kept running, fueled by adrenaline and a desperate, flickering hope. She was halfway across when she saw it, a dark opening in the canyon wall, almost completely hidden by a curtain of overgrown vines. The Whispering Cave. She dove through the vines, tumbling onto the hard rock floor of the cave, just as a bullet splintered the rock where her head had been a second before. She lay there gasping for air, the pouch still clutched in her hand. The gunfire outside slowly died down. She was alive. She had made it. But she was trapped in a dark cave, with an army outside waiting to kill her. And she was alone. Or so she thought. From the deepest shadows of the cave, a voice spoke, calm and steady. You took your sweet time, Mrs. Whitlock. Josie scrambled backwards, raising her rifle, her heart leaping into her throat. A figure emerged from the darkness. It was a woman, dressed in dusty rancher's clothes, holding a large buffalo rifle with an ease that spoke of long familiarity. Her face was weathered and lined, but her eyes were sharp and intelligent. It was Mattie Rhodes, the widowed ranch owner from the neighboring valley, a quiet, church-going woman known for her prize-winning cattle and her sharp tongue. Josie stared at her, completely dumbfounded. Mrs. Rhodes, what are you doing here? Mattie Rhodes allowed herself a thin, grim smile. My husband was a friend of your husband's, Josie. They were working together to expose Cassidy. After Daniel was murdered, I took over his work. She nodded toward the cave entrance. Or did you think they called me the ghost of the plains for my charming personality? The twist was so stunning, Josie could only stare. The quiet widow. The ghost of the plains. It was impossible. And yet, it was the only thing that made sense. Daniel was supposed to meet me here with Taza, Mattie continued, her voice all business. When he didn't show, I knew something had gone wrong. I've been waiting. They're all out there, Josie said, her mind still reeling. Soldiers, the marshal, Cassidy's men. Runs Like Wind and his warriors are pinned down. We're trapped. We're not trapped. Maddie said, checking the load on her buffalo rifle. We're in the perfect position. She pointed to a narrow tunnel at the back of the cave. This cave system runs all through these mountains. It's how I get around without being seen. This tunnel will take us up to the ridge, right behind them. Hope, fierce and bright, surged through Josie. We can outflank them. That's the plan, Maddie said. But first things first. She held out her hand. The journal and the map. The commander's on his way. I sent a rider out 2 days ago, but he won't get here in time to stop this. We need to hold them off, and we need to make sure that proof doesn't get destroyed. Josie handed over the precious saddlebag. Maddie secured it. All right, Josie Whitlock, the old woman said, a flicker of admiration in her eyes. Your husband would be proud of you. Now let's go show these bastards what 2 angry women and a rifle can do. They moved through the narrow, dark tunnels, Maddie leading the way as if she'd been born in them. The air was cool and damp. After what felt like an eternity, they saw a faint light ahead. They emerged onto a narrow ledge, high up on the canyon wall. Below them, spread out like toys, were the soldiers and Cassidy's men, all their attention focused on the crevice where Runs Like Wind and his men were still pinned down. Josie and Maddie were directly behind them. They had the high ground, the element of surprise. You take the ones on the left, Maddie whispered, raising her heavy rifle. I'll take the ones on the right. Don't kill them unless you have to. A wounded man makes more noise and causes more trouble than a dead one. Josie rested her Winchester on the rock, her hands steady now. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard rage. She lined up her sights on a man crouched behind a boulder. She took a breath, let it out slow, and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked the silence, and the man below screamed and dropped his rifle, clutching his shoulder. At the same instant, Maddie's buffalo rifle roared, its deep boom echoing like thunder. Another man went down, his leg twisting beneath him. The men below were thrown into utter confusion. They were being attacked from their rear, from a position they thought was secure. They started firing wildly up at the cliffs, their bullets pinging harmlessly off the rocks. Down below, Runs Like Wind seized the opportunity. He and his warriors burst from their cover, charging toward the panicked soldiers, letting out fierce war cries. The ambush had been turned on its head. The hunters had become the hunted. The fight was short and brutal. Caught between the charging Apache and the deadly accurate fire from above, the soldiers' line broke. Some threw down their weapons and surrendered. Others fled into the darkness. Josie saw Marshal Cololton, his face a mask of disbelief and fury, trying to rally his men. But it was too late. He turned his horse to flee, but a single shot from Maddie's rifle took the horse out from under him. He went down in a heap. Bo Cassidy was nowhere to be seen. The coward had likely fled at the first sign of trouble. As the echoes of the last gunshot faded, a new sound filled the valley. The rhythmic beat of horses, lots of them, coming at a steady, disciplined canter, and the call of a bugle. The cavalry had arrived. A full company of blue-coated soldiers rode into the valley, led by an officer with silver hair and a stern face. He took in the scene, the surrendered men, the wounded, the Apache warriors standing victorious among them. He rode up to Maddie Rhodes, who had made her way down from the cliffs. Mrs. Rhodes, he said, his voice deep and authoritative, it seems you've had a busy night. You could say that, Commander, Maddie replied, wiping a smudge of gunpowder from her cheek. She held up the saddlebag. But I believe I have something that will interest you. The last will and testament of Mr. Bo Cassidy's criminal empire. The commander took the bag and looked over at Josie, who was now standing with Runs Like Wind. His eyes, Josie saw, were not cold or accusatory. They were tired, but they were fair. And this must be Mrs. Whitlock, he said. I've heard a great deal about you. He looked at the journal, then back at her. Your husband was a brave man, a patriot. He was working under my direct authority to expose the corruption in this territory. His death will not be in vain. The truth, all of it, came crashing down. Daniel hadn't just been some secret vigilante. He was an agent of the U.S. Army, a spy, and no one, not even his own wife, could know. The aftermath was a blur. The corrupt Marshal Cololton and the surrendered soldiers were taken into custody. The commander assured Runs Like Wind that the treaty his people had signed, the one Daniel and Taza had died to protect, would be honored. Bo Cassidy, they learned, had been caught by an army patrol miles away, trying to escape with a saddlebag full of stolen money. His reign of terror was over. As the sun rose, casting a golden light over the blood-soaked valley, Mattie Rhodes came and stood beside Josie. "The territory is changing, Josie," she said softly, painfully, slowly. "But it's changing. You could come back with me. We could run my ranch together, help build something better." It was a tempting offer, a life of peace, a return to the world she knew. But Josie looked over at Runs Like Wind, who was watching his brother Taza being tended to by an army surgeon. She looked at the warriors who had accepted her, fought beside her. She thought of her husband, the man she was only just now beginning to understand. Her old life was a ghost. It didn't fit her anymore. She wasn't the same woman who had knelt by a stream and given a dying man a drink of water. "My name is Kiona," she said, using the name Runs Like Wind had given her. It meant brown hills, strong, enduring. "And I think I've finally found where I belong." Mattie nodded, a deep understanding in her eyes. "Then I wish you well, Kiona. Perhaps our paths will cross again in better times." As the soldiers began to march their prisoners away, Runs Like Wind approached her. "The white woman offers you a way back," he said, his face unreadable. Kiona finished tightening the cinch on Clementine's saddle. "I'm not looking for a way back," she said, meeting his gaze. "Only forward." A flicker of warmth, of deep respect, entered his dark eyes. "The path ahead is hard." She gave him a small, weary smile. "Show me a path that isn't." He nodded once, a gesture of complete acceptance. "Then you ride with us, Kiona, as one of us." They rode out of that valley, heading east, into the rising sun. Kiona didn't look back. Behind her was a life of dust and ghosts. Ahead lay uncertainty and danger. But for the first time since Daniel's death, she felt truly alive. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a warrior. The old saying, the one the ranch hands used to scare her with, came back to her. If you see one Apache, the rest are already watching you. But they'd left out the most important part. Sometimes being seen is the only way to finally be found. If you enjoyed that story, do me a favor and absolutely destroy that like button. And if you're new here, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell, because you won't want to miss what's coming next. Let me know down in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Josie's shoes? I'd love to hear it. Thanks for stopping by.